Good afternoon, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Let's open up things with a brief introduction about Tallan. Tallan was founded in 1985, and we have offices kind of across the U.S., one in Hartford, New York, Boston, Tampa, D.C., and Southern California. Our main office is actually in Hartford, Connecticut. We are one of Microsoft's national system integrators. I believe there's only about 30 companies in the U.S. that fall in that category. From the beginning, Tallan did purely e-commerce development in the beginning. Frankly, there just weren't any e-commerce products available at that time. Today, we still do a fair amount of custom e-commerce development, but we still work with several packages as well. In addition to Tallan's e-commerce practice, our in-house user experience, mobile, business intelligence, cloud initiatives allow us to provide clients with experts in every important area related to their e-commerce solutions. One of our speakers today is Stan Kennedy. I'll turn it over to him for introductions.
Hey, thanks, Greg. Welcome again, everyone, to our webinar today. I'm Stan Kennedy. I lead our BizTalk and Cloud initiatives. A little bit about me. I've been in the industry for over 15 years. Really specializing in Azure now. Have been working with it since the inception. Involved in the Microsoft Operation Azure curriculum. Graduated from that. It's a 10-week program. And also Azure certified. So that's a little bit about me. I support e-commerce from a cloud perspective, so myself and the team backs up the e-commerce platform from a cloud perspective.
My name is Greg Ebert, and I oversee our e-commerce practice here at Tallan, and I'm fairly involved with our e-commerce partnerships that we have. I've been working in the field for over 13 years now, dealing with clients as large as Disney and as small as internet startups. It's kind of given me a unique understanding of e-commerce today and kind of where it's headed tomorrow. While there's been a lot of movement in the e-commerce space recently, e-commerce in the cloud is particularly promising. Today, we'll discuss a few reasons why, how e-commerce is changing, primary considerations for moving to the cloud, best practices for Azure-hosted e-commerce applications, how Azure is well-suited for supporting your mobile strategy. We'll go through a brief demo. Let's start things off by highlighting a few key points about the changing e-commerce landscape. Customer expectations today are just not the same as they were in the past and not the same as what they will be in the future. Customers want to be able to access your e-commerce application from any device. They also expect the application to be available 24/7 with very fast page load times, even over a cellular data connection. Customers also expect a rich user experience tailored towards the device and the location that they're using at the time. To deliver on this, companies face several challenges trying to live up to those expectations. For starters, most companies do not have the IT infrastructure in place to host an e-commerce application. Companies understand their business pretty well, however, they typically do not understand what it takes to deliver a full end-to-end e-commerce solution. E-commerce applications also need to be able to adapt and scale for planned and unplanned peaks. As you have more promotions or as the Christmas season arrives. E-commerce expands your customer base to cities around the world. Companies find it difficult to provide the same personalization for customers that are in Rome as they do for their customers in New York, and site performance as well, I should say. Many companies with existing e-commerce applications actually don't have a disaster recovery plan in place. If the site were to go down or if they were to lose their data or that type of thing, which is one of those things like insurance where you don't necessarily realize you need it until you actually need it. I'll hand it over to Stan to discuss how the cloud can help solve many of these issues for you.
Thanks again, Greg. I think the first question that comes to everybody's mind is the cloud right for you? And I think the first thing we look at is elasticity. And Windows Azure can seamlessly and cost-effectively enable elasticity, which simply just means to be able to scale up or down, easy. So, for example, recently a multi-tenant web service experienced almost a 700% spike in traffic due to its recent ads. Now, traditionally, the only way we would deal with that or handle that is to basically go through and anticipate our traffic. So we're in a bit of a guessing game there. So what we typically do is overestimate, and that ends up wasting time and money. With Windows Azure, the web service in this particular client doubled their Windows Azure compute capacity in minutes. So it just took a couple minutes to change one value in an XML file, and Windows Azure took care of the rest. And within a half an hour, the service was validated via the logs. It had doubled its capacity. All the web services were taking traffic. The full cost for that burst capacity was around $70 in about 5 minutes of operation time. So I think elasticity is the first compelling reason. Another compelling reason is time to market. Azure lowers the barrier to innovation. A new product or service added to the Azure platform can be technology ready, within a short time, making it available to the market sooner. So if you regularly update the products and services, you want to go with a platform that lets you scale up or down with ease without having to invest a big budget and project schedule and a physical infrastructure. I think flexible pricing is another compelling reason. So traditional on-premise or hosted solutions rely on, again, forecasting the highest predicted workload. So you tend to over-anticipate those needs. But that over-provisioning tends to, leave your assets being underutilized. With Azure, though, you only pay for what you use. Capacity can be reduced as you need to lower costs, or you can turn the dial back up as demand rises. And so the Windows Azure platform, there's two types of flexible plans. One is subscriptions or pay by month, and the other is pay as you go, or what's called more the utility pricing model. So let's talk about why the cloud for business, with some compelling reasons from a business perspective. I think we'll cover more on flexible pricing models. We'll talk about pricing, pay as you go, and then return on investment, ROI, and total cost of ownership, TCO. So I think billing is an important planning aspect. When you create your Azure account subscription, you typically, for example, give a credit card. Though it's probably more appropriate to call and get an invoice set up. But in the field, I think we've seen the most important aspect is to consider how this impacts your SDLC and deployments. So, for example, it may make more sense to have a separate account for staging and production to manage and track costs. Also, Azure has a billing portal that enables you to check your usage and costs at any time. There's also a warning email that can be sent when you exceed your usage past your plan subscription. We always say when you first deploy that application, make sure you monitor it and make sure you monitor the usage to make sure you're not incurring any charges that you shouldn't be. So, for example, if you have 6 instances deployed to staging, even though they're stopped and not in use, you're still incurring those charges. But what I call is leaving the faucet on. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Also, take advantage of the commitment level discounts, the advantage of free trials and member offers. Tallan can help navigate that. So let's get more into the cloud economics of it. So here we can see, I'm going to have a couple of these. One is on-premise or a hosted solutions, your typical traditional hosted solution, which is what we're seeing here. And next we'll do the cloud. But you can see here on the vertical IT capacity, you can see that the more resources we need, the more it goes up. And then the axis for time, as time goes on, you can see here that we're going to basically follow an actual load of it. So I think a good example is e-commerce, using an example where we have peak. So let's say Christmas time is the peak period. You can see here on the left, as the beginning of time, let's say that's February or March. You can see that in a typical hosted solution scenario, we've anticipated we have all of our resources lined up to handle peak. So you can see we're in the green here, which is great to a certain extent, but it's not really, because we're very underutilized. We're leaving capital on the laying around, and not to mention we're paying a ton of maintenance costs during that period. So we're maintaining peak all year round is really the point here. Now, let's hope that we got the right amount of resources planned, and let's fast forward here to the red section. You can see that for some reason we didn't plan enough resources. Now we're in peak period. We're starting to see a degradation. Customers are unhappy. And then what happens is we get calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, and everybody's trying to figure out how to limp along through this peak season. And for some reason, that happens year after year. Now, we've gone through peak, and you can see here that as time goes on, let's say this is January and February area, you can see that now it's dropped off significantly. Now, we need to maintain those resources all year. So as a comparison, if we move to the next one, you can see this is really what cloud economics is all about. Here you can see the same type of load pattern, except this time we can start out with 1 or 2 servers in the beginning. So March all the way up till peak, we can run the 1 or 2 servers, and that will be more than enough to handle our load. You can see we have no capital laying around at that period. Then as we get into peak, we can start to dial that up. So we can do that progressively, 3, 4, all the way up to 10 servers and more if we need it. And then again, after peak season, we can dial that back down. The next thing I think we should probably address is return on investment. So from time to time, I get the question, well, I hear the cloud at the end of the day will provide no cost savings when it's all said and done. Is it really cost effective to go to the cloud? Well, I guess the simple answer is I typically say is it depends. Not what they want to hear, but the other thing to consider furthermore is that cost is not always the compelling reason of going to the cloud. Think of companies with limited IT resources, for example. But the basic formula, the basic broad strokes of the formula is really to calculate your ROI based on, your cloud TCO, your on-premise TCO, the migration costs, and include any consulting services with that, your hidden costs, there's always hidden costs, and the application lifespan. I think one important thing, though, that's the advertised formula, if you will. But I think what we found is it really depends on, and this is where the depends comes in, I think the most, is it really depends on your workload pattern, and we have them on the bottom of the screen here. Unpredictable bursting, predictable bursting, grow fast, on-off play a huge role in how much ROI you can expect. So these workload patterns, I think, should be considered in your TCO and ROI. So let's take, for example, again, the e-commerce seasonal. If you have that retail e-commerce web application, it's seasonal based, your workload pattern falls under predictable burst. Chances are you will have a favorable ROI because of the wasted resources that are required to maintain that peak all year, as we mentioned in the previous slide. Some compelling reasons for why the cloud and IT. I think time to market is one of those. We mentioned that before. You can get the infrastructure up and running in a matter of minutes or to hours, very short period of time. Also, you can extend your platform based on actual sales volume, not anticipated IT needs, which I think is key. You can scale back after seasonal sales peak, and then no data backups, IT updates, and redundant storage right out of the box. There's many cloud options out there. There's the Amazon. At Tallan, we feel like Azure is the superior platform for many reasons. But just to name a few here, I think the massive compute power, the redundant storage architecture, powerful SQL Server databases, It's very easy to scale. Just with a change of a configuration, you can go from 2 servers to 20 in a matter of minutes. And then also, it's very secure, hardened infrastructure. Now, if security is one of those reasons why you won't go to the cloud, I would just say do some really great research on this. There's plenty of white papers out there, and we'd also be happy to talk through some of these concerns with you. But I would say, at least arm yourself with the knowledge about how the Azure and security is implemented. Now, what I like to typically illustrate the cloud computing by comparing the generator, which is the typical hosted solutions or on-premise IT, shown on the left with the receptacle on the right. I think on the left, if we decide to use a generator for power, for example, the first thing we need to do is figure out how much power we're going to need, what the peak time period is, and then we need to shell out a bunch of cash up front, so there's a ton of upfront costs. And then once we purchase that, hopefully we made the right decision in terms of capacity, but then we need to maintain it, oil changes, fuel, tune-ups, and pay maintenance. I think that rings very familiar with a lot of the hosted solutions. Now on the right, the cloud is represented with a receptacle. It's on-demand power. It's a common interface. You pay only for what you use, and there's no maintenance. I think best of all, there's no upfront costs. Again, which this plays into some of the other compelling benefits. Time to market. You can put up proof of concepts and then delete the instances. I mean, there's a lot that goes into this that I think is very compelling. I think the final thing that I'd like to kind of talk through is how this thing scales. So when you change it from 2 to 10 servers, what does that mean? Well, there's different ways of scaling. When you create the instances, you can select what type of virtual machine or VM. So maybe you want one with significant horsepower, that being memory, cores, disk. But another scaling model that it supports very easily is increasing the VM number of instances, where it duplicates that same VM across many servers. And so it also puts it across different fault domains to protect you in case one goes down. I'd like to turn it back over to Greg.
Thanks, Ben. When setting up your e-commerce application on Azure, there's a number of configurations that can be used depending on your needs. Before we dive into those configurations, though, let's kind of just set a baseline for our e-commerce application that we'll be using here. The sample architecture we'll be dealing with is a core e-commerce application engine having one or more websites and clients kind of associated with it, RESTful web services that it interacts with. This will allow you to customize each of the client UIs, yet still maintaining a central set of business rules and data. You'll have your website, your mobile app for Android, your mobile app for iOS, your tablet website if you want to customize it a little bit more for that. Let's dive into the Windows 8 client app as an example a little more. Windows 8 is fairly new. It does provide a lot of interesting feature opportunities, though, for e-commerce. With this type of architecture, you can quickly and easily add a personalized Windows 8 client app to your application by integrating with those RESTful web services we were talking about earlier, and then tailoring the experience for Windows 8 and taking advantages of things like semantic zoom and the search and the sharing criteria, charms. Now, not every company is going to have all of these UIs, nor is the same amount of infrastructure going to be required, by each company. We'll take a brief look at what the e-commerce application architecture and the Azure infrastructure will look like for 3 typical scenarios. We've got our startup, our established e-commerce site with seasonal peaks, and then, finally we'll dive into the Fortune 500 company. E-commerce in the cloud appears to startups companies for several reasons. There's that low cost barrier of entry we were talking about earlier. You also don't need to worry about supporting the hardware for your site. And then finally, as your business grows to be the next kind of Amazon.com, your site will scale with you automatically. So if we take a look at what that architecture looks like on Azure, when you initially deploy the alpha release of your e-commerce application to production, it could be hosted on a single virtual machine running against, an Azure database while you're kind of working through all the details and just kind of getting through those initial steps. When you launch or as your traffic increases over time, you could move each component to its own virtual machine or cloud service and, breaking things up a little bit that way so it scales a little better. Now, this is still, this particular setup is still only a single virtual machine or service per area. So we'll take a slightly different approach with larger e-commerce sites or those with seasonal peaks. For the e-commerce sites with seasonal peaks, there'll be crazy busy at some times and then pretty light other times of the year. But if you take that and compare it to kind of the Halloween or Christmas stores where they're only open a few months of the year and there's people in there buying things like crazy during those 3 or 4 months that they're open, the same concept can be applied to e-commerce sites with seasonal traffic. Do you really want to have all those extra servers sitting around all year, collecting dust when you only need them when your traffic increases around the holidays? With the cloud-based solution, obviously you don't have to. You can scale your site up and down as traffic does. And this holds true for the unexpected traffic spikes as well. If you take, not so recent, but a fairly well-known Target.com outage where they had a release for one of their product lines, I'm sure they were happy for that the products were so well received and that people were really trying to buy them, but I'm sure they would have preferred their site not to crash. Think about if that happened to you, how much lost revenue would your company miss out on if your e-commerce site went down during your busy season or a spike in traffic due to a popular promotion? During much of the year, you may run a similar setup where you're only running on a single VM, hosting each of the components that we were talking about earlier to help kind of keep costs low. But if you want kind of some redundancy and then also to kind of handle those seasonal spikes, you'll scale out each of the components by adding VMs to kind of a cloud service supporting that component. And then you'll put that behind kind of an Azure load balancer, to kind of balance things out between all the different servers. And then once the seasonal spike or the spike recedes, you can scale that back down to just maybe 1 or 2 VMs per component if you want to. You could still leave kind of the load balancer and everything in place so that you can easily scale up and down that as needed. Now, well-established companies such as like a Fortune 500 company usually have to maintain seeds of servers. To do so, they often employ large infrastructure support teams. Think about all the time spent on NIC card replacements, hard drive failures, OS upgrades, spinning up more servers, retiring old ones, as CPU improves and that type of thing. If all that noise was stripped away, IT could spend more time focusing on the business initiatives. When serving customers all around the world, items such as image and payload response times become more prevalent as well, and will vary across the globe if everything's hosted kind of in one central location. CDNs, such as those used with Azure, are an important part of a global e-commerce architecture and strategy. Frankly, Azure was just built with globalization in mind as well, but it actually plays pretty well with that. General Mills is actually an example of a large company that's recently taken advantage of a cloud-based solution with great success, frankly. They were able to bring the gluten-free site online very quickly and very low cost. I think they even mentioned, half as much of the cost and twice as fast as a traditional deployment. Feel free to check out the site and explore it whenever you have time. As an end user, you'll probably never even know that it wasn't an on-premise solution, that everything was hosted out on Azure. In order to provide that most responsive and available site possible, large companies will build in redundancy into their infrastructure up front. There are always going to be multiple virtual machines supporting each component, and all the static assets, not just images. There'll be JavaScript files, CSS files, static HTML files if there are some. They'll be hosted out on the CDN as well. With this setup, you can scale out each component to support any amount of traffic. And with this as well, it's not really highlighted here, but with the database, there'll be backups and things involved, so you won't have to worry about losing your data and things. So this particular particular framework allows for to scale for quite a bit of traffic. And you see them using this a lot more, so they don't have to deal with maintaining those farms and upgrading those farms. Now, in addition to supporting general e-commerce application, Azure can play an important role in implementing your mobile strategy as well. Let's first look at kind of what I call the high 5-level steps of a successful mobile strategy. Kind of assessing your mobile maturity, gathering the team needed, determining which mobile apps to build, and evaluating which features you'll be on each, developing the actual mobile app, deploying them to the appropriate app store, and then finally maintaining and enhancing each mobile app during the production support. Along the way, you'll want to answer several key Azure-related questions. First, is it feasible for me even deploy to Azure rather than on-premise servers? Do I have Azure experts in-house, or can I bring a company like Tallan in to assist? And then what will my Azure infrastructure look like? Like, what is my goal? My starting infrastructure as well as my ending infrastructure, and what is that plan for getting there? And then, lastly, what do I have my infrastructure team do once the app is deployed to production? Because they're not going to have to worry about server maintenance, upgrades, NIC card replacements, and that type of thing. With the right architecture and Azure infrastructure in place, building and deploying new client apps, mobile client apps, becomes much easier. If we walk through the recent Windows 8 deployment, for an example, first we'd consider, do you already have any existing iOS and Android apps that are supported by any particular backend services already? Next, we'll determine who the best resource is to develop the apps. Do we have Windows 8 expertise in-house? Do we bring in a company like Tallan? Then we'll want to discuss what features will be present in the app and what device OS specific benefits we can take advantage of, such as the charms, the semantic zooms, the sharing module, or sharing charms. And then once the app is built and tested, we'll want to deploy it out to the Windows Store for everyone to use. For our demo, we'll be walking through a few key Azure administration tasks, and then we'll show an example Windows 8 client app running against a local e-commerce engine and then an Azure hosted e-commerce engine. I'll hand the webinar back to Stan so he can kick off the demos.
Thanks, Greg. Let me bring up the portal. I'm going to give that a minute to load. So while that's loading, what I like to go through is kind of give you a lap around the Windows Azure portal. There's a lot here. I think I'll concentrate on a couple of key features that's more relevant to the e-commerce webinar and the content. And that you can see this, I'd like to first this is the dashboard. So when you first log on to the Windows portal with your Windows Live ID, the first thing you'll notice is that I can kind of see a status at a glance of all the services running. So here you can see I have a virtual machine created, I have a storage account created, and I have a service bus namespace also created. I think the different features here, we have websites, virtual machines, mobile devices, cloud services, SQL databases, storage, networks, SQL reporting, service bus, media services, and Active Directory. So these are all the tools you'll need to deploy a enterprise-level solution. What I like to go through is specifically the new virtual machines capabilities. So this would be the infrastructure as a service capabilities within Azure. You can see that I have one created. It's very I created this and it was up and running in about 10 minutes. So creating a new server instance is pretty straightforward. Let me walk you through a couple of those screens though. So down at the bottom, if we click New, I have a couple options. I can create one from a gallery. I could do a quick create. So let's do the gallery. So the gallery just simply means I can select from preset images. So the VHDs are all ready. The Windows servers, all the cumulative updates are done. All the service packs, all of the software is installed that I may need. So everything is basically right there at your fingertips. So in this example, let's say we create a Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1. So we would choose that from the gallery. Let's go to the next step. Here I would give it a unique name. We would also, the default is administrator, so that's what you'll use to remote desktop into the server. And I'll just give it a password here. And then we select what type of server. So based on our needs, our budget, this is where we would select how big of a server we would like. So in this example, I'll choose extra small. Ends up being around $10 a month. And here we use a standalone virtual machine. Again, I'll give it my DNS name. We can also have different availability sets, and this just simply means if I create multiple instances, this instructs, if you create availability set, it just means that it distributes the different instances across different, what we call fault domains. So if you think about how virtual machines work, you have a physical host and you have a collection of those physical machines within a certain fault domain. So we can select instances spread out across different fault domains within Azure. And that's it. Once you do that, you can create a new one. And hit OK. So that's it. That's going to spin for a few minutes, and then we'll have a server that's up and ready. We can use our typical remote desktop to log into it and use this DNS name to connect to it. I think the other thing I would like to show, we typically use service buses when we do the implementations connecting to external systems, for example. The service bus has a lot of functionality in terms of integration, connecting to your on-premise line of business applications. So this is another important component we typically use for that. And then finally, I'd like to just kind of give you a preview of the pricing. It's a simple pricing calculator on Azure's site, just to kind of give you an idea what kind of pricing. If you go to Azure.com, there's a pricing link for a calculator. And you can just kind of see it's a simple slider. So, for example, if I want an extra small, which I just created, I want one of those. Maybe I want two for load balancing. The extra small is actually shared resources. So maybe I want to go to a small load balance. So we have two instances of this web application server. We can also determine what kind of storage we'd like to have on that server, what kind of bandwidth we expect, and then there's a full calculator there. So this is an example of how to just kind of get an idea of what the cost would be. And I think with that, I'll turn it back over to Greg for his demo.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be demoing kind of a Windows 8 shopping app that's got a client hosted on my machine here, and then it's going to be hitting a back-end web service server, basically. So we've got our shopping client here, the Windows 8 app, and the shopping web API, which is the server side of that has the RESTful services that will be calling. So if we just start this up, first I'm going to start out just running locally here. And so we've got the sample app, it just pulled the catalog from the server. We can navigate down through the individual categories, viewing the products, taking advantage of some of the Windows 8 features here, such as the semantic zoom, and then, toggling between a few things, also just generally searching, getting back some search results. So all of this is hitting out just to my local web service server that's running here. Now, if we do something similar for the Windows 8 app, for the Azure server, I've got a virtual machine set up out there for that. And let me just toggle that over. So I'll be hitting that server with the client rather than my local. And I'll restart here. And now you'll see we'll just kind of running against similar type of thing. I mean, the client app itself, there's no difference as far as performance-wise or the responses that we get back from the server. It's pretty easy to easily navigate down through everything. So with that in mind, if we just take a quick look at what that really is, like Stan was saying, you can spin up a virtual server really easy, and it's just like remoting into any other machine. You've got your IIS website with the way you set it up for everything, and then you've got your files obviously that you deployed out there to support it. Just a sample of the URL that we're hitting. I can just kind of just download the version of the catalog, for example, just to kind of show that everything's kind of running out here as well. And really, that's it. I mean, you'll set up these virtual machines like you would any other virtual machine in your local box or your local in-premise type of situation. So with that, I'll toggle back over to the deck. So now that we know kind of the cloud offers a little bit of something for everyone, kind of where do we go from here? What are kind of our next steps? So Tallan offers a few next steps for you to get started. For those of you who want to get moving down the e-commerce path but don't really know where to begin, let us help solidify a roadmap for making e-commerce happen for you. What is your e-commerce strategy going to be? Like, what's your long-term goals with it? What type of interfaces do you want to have? What types of applications do you want deployed out there? What types of features do you want to have? And what type of systems do you actually want to integrate with? For those of you who want an e-commerce site, don't know whether you want to host it locally or within Azure, we can come in and help you decide with their e-commerce on Azure Quick Start, which one's kind of right for you. I mean, to Tan's point earlier, Azure is a great platform, but you do need to make sure it's right for you. And for those of you who already have kind of your e-commerce application out and running, you've got your iOS apps, you've got your Android apps, but frankly, be one of the first in your market to get your Windows 8 app deployed to the Windows Store. Take advantage of our experience with e-commerce and Windows 8 to get your application up and running quickly. If you think about when the iTunes Store first came out or the Android Store first came out, you get a huge advantage by being one of the first ones to market there. And let's be honest, Microsoft has a huge customer base, and so the store is going to catch on quite a bit there. We've gone through quite a lot today, so let's briefly kind of recap what we've discussed. To begin with, e-commerce is constantly evolving, and it will always evolve. It's going to be kind of an ongoing situation, and you want to be able to adapt, as you go and evolve with it. By utilizing Azure to host your e-commerce application, you don't have to worry about purchasing and supporting any IT infrastructure in-house, and you can simply focus on the app, focus on your business. Using such an architecture and infrastructure as well, you can more easily establish and implement your mobile strategy. You can scale up if one of your mobile apps is getting a lot more traffic than you expected. You can easily scale up the back end on that without having to worry about it. Tallan's worked with a number of areas related to e-commerce, such as Azure, mobile, UX for years, and recently actually a fair amount of Windows 8 development. Let us focus on the e-commerce application while you focus on the business. Bring us in as the technology experts there. I'll hand it over to Monica for the Q&A portion of the webinar now at this point.
Thank you, Greg and Stan. If you have a question for today's presenters, please take a moment to enter it into the IM area on your left. We do have a question to kick it off, and there was an initial response, but just want to also put it out there for Greg and Stan to expand on. How do you address two items, PCI compliance for passing encrypted data to payment gateways, and also the integration to back-end ERPs that are installed on-premise?
Yeah, this is Stan. I can take this. As Andy mentioned here in a brief reply, and actually I went through it on a demo just kind of showing you where that feature is located. But typically we use the Azure Service Bus as the integration middleware, if you will. It provides endpoints. We can use those endpoints to communicate, to expose those endpoints to your on-premise systems, and vice versa. Right now, the architecture for Windows Azure for communicating with both your internal on-premise line of business applications, including ERPs, but also external, so B2B as well. So the Service Bus layer is really the component there that we typically implement. For PCI compliance, it's kind of a hard answer to address here. I mean, the simple answer, I think, in the context of this webinar, I'm assuming that it's credit card information because there's HIPAA PCI and there's all kinds of different levels. But even with the level of PCI, I think that your question is, Kevin, we typically address this in our architecture very similar to on-premise or application architectures where it's still service-oriented architecture. We typically use services for the payment service. It does it well, and most of those services scale, so it meets all of the cloud characteristics. So we typically don't do that through Azure. Again, we have to assess each client individually, but I would say generally, I think in the context of this webinar, you're probably looking for credit card data, and it depends on the amounts as well. So if it's MasterCard data and there's all kinds of different criteria there, but I would say typically what we've done is it's Azure. It kind of goes against the business model of Azure. If you think about it, I mean, in order to get that PCI compliance, the team at Microsoft, I mean, some of the things they would have to do, for example, is fence off, servers. And part of the things that Microsoft, I think, is focused on, in my opinion, is making those servers a commodity, not really knowing which server is running which application. All that should not be surfaced to anyone. So I think it goes, better along with the security. So it does that very well. So I think it kind of goes against the business model. I know there's been some talk about becoming PCI compliant, but from our perspective, it's services. It's still a service that we should expose, whether it's calling on-premise service or most likely what we do is call external third-party services.
Yeah, to kind of add to that, most of even when you're in-house, you'll have a third-party processor, like you were saying, where that's actually doing the credit card processing, and most of the time the credit card number was stored there as well, and you'll just reference the profile that's coming back from it. With that, as much as your application is a pass-through type of thing, the same way you secure your in-house servers for securing that information as it passes through is similar to what you'll do for the VMs for the SQL Azure. And so, if you, as long as I wouldn't, frankly, even on-premise system, I wouldn't want to store credit card information in-house. I'd want to pass that on and use a third party to store that as well.
Thanks for the question.
Okay, and when people talk about the cloud, they usually have security in mind. Greg, could you talk a little bit about how Windows Azure, how secure it is to host an e-commerce application?
Yeah, I should probably take that one. So as I mentioned in the webinar, I think Microsoft has done a tremendous, outstanding job addressing security. Security is different from compliance, in my opinion, but you have to make sure that the compliance meets your needs, obviously. So, for example, healthcare, it's a bit of a challenge in the Azure environment, for example. But specifically for security, I think Microsoft, what they've done is they've addressed it in a multi-level fashion. So, people think about security, they think about hey, if I log into my VM, can I hop over to the next VM and see their data? But I think we have to take it more, and what Microsoft has done is take it more from a holistic view. There's many levels of security. So from the human aspect, their data centers, their restricted access, biometric security scanning. There's no piggyback into the data centers, and they do employee background checks. From a data perspective, all of the data information is SSL encrypted. It requires a strong access key to make that connection. It has firewall IP rules, so you can actually exclude out, outside of the range of IPs. And just like with SQL Server, it's tabular data stream, so any kind of connection requires a secure connection for DDS. And so it rejects any kind of non-encrypted connections. So that's at the data level. The application level, it supports the best practice. Really, that's on the developer or the implementer of the software. But it does support a lot of the best practices for the application security models. Let me see. The other, from a host perspective, they do frequent security patches. All of the servers are automatically patched, so you maintain a high level of security from that perspective. The layers of isolation managed by the subscription account. There's many layers on top of that. The IE is locked down, so minimal drivers loaded, and the operation system, the OS, is actually a stripped down version of it. Let me see. I think the other two are, from a networking perspective, they've included multiple levels of firewalls. There's VLANs, so if you create a few instances within the Azure, you actually have your VLAN within that. But on top of that, you have your TCP routed via load balance, your encrypted, I think it's the encrypted channel network to the fabric controller, and the fabric is kind of is another layer on top of all of the VM instances. So it's not like you can just remote into an IP address and start wrecking the systems. I mean, they thought about it on so many different levels. There's no access outside your VLAN. Finally, I think the last level is from a physical perspective. They have world-class data centers. They are ISO, I believe it's 27001 and SAS 70 Type 2 certifications. So all of those certifications are checked throughout the year to make sure they're adhering to certain standards. But if you'd like to learn more, I welcome you to contact us. I'll do a personal call and we'll walk through security if you want. But we can point you to many white papers out there, and I think education is power in this instance.
Andy kind of put into the text area there an example of a company building kind of a level 1 PCI compliance site using Azure. And, you can definitely set it up that way. And one thing we've worked with clients on before as well, if they're not comfortable with PCI clients in Azure, is, actually just setting up a subdomain where the payment page itself is hosted on the actual payment gateway, such as PayPal Pro Gateway, where, you can redirect to them and offload some of that liability risk. So they're hosting the actual payment page, and then it comes back to you, afterwards. So there's a variety of solutions that we can work towards for that.